Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock had always enjoyed their early morning jogs together. It was their little ritual, a break from the chaos of their hectic lives. The park was peaceful, the air crisp, and the path they jogged along was shaded by tall trees that created a canopy of green. Keanu smiled as he looked down at his two little dogs, both of them trotting happily alongside him. Sandra, ever the dog lover, had brought her own little dog, a fluffy terrier, that seemed to be bouncing, along with more energy than anyone could have expected for a morning run. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt right. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the world still seemed quiet, just them, the dogs, and the serenity of the morning. As they jogged, they chatted casually, talking about everything and nothing at all. It was moments like these that made them appreciate life and the simple things. But the peace didn't last. Out of nowhere, the roar of loud engines interrupted the calm. A group of bikers, all revved up on their motorcycles, zoomed down the path with reckless abandon. They were speeding, not caring for the safety of anyone or anything around them. Keanu and Sandra instinctively slowed down, stepping to the side, to let them pass. But as they did, one of the bikers, a large man in a leather jacket, made eye contact with the dogs. And then it happened. In an instant, the biker kicked one of the dogs. The small pup yelped in pain, its tiny body being shoved to the ground from the force of the kick. The biker didn't even flinch as he passed, laughing with his friends. Keanu's heart dropped. Sandra's face turned pale with shock. They both froze for a moment, unsure if what they just witnessed was real. "Did he just—" Sandra whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and rage. Keanu felt his stomach tighten. He was a man of peace, someone who preferred calmness over conflict. But this was something different. Something triggered in him that he couldn't ignore. The biker's laughter echoed in the distance, and the rest of the group rode off, completely unaware of the storm they'd just caused. Keanu looked down at the dog, who was now whimpering, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to ask, "Why, Sandra?" Her eyes narrowing in anger, was already moving toward the dog. "I'm going after him," she said, her voice steady but filled with fury. But Keanu reached out and gently stopped her. "Let's make sure the dog's okay first. We'll deal with this later." His calmness made Sandra pause, but only for a moment. The biker had crossed a line, and she wasn't about to let that go without consequences. Keanu knelt down beside the dog, petting it gently, trying to calm both the dog and himself. Sandra was already pulling out her phone, ready to report what had just happened, but there was something else in the air, something unsettling. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The bikers might have been long gone, but their actions weren't. He turned to Sandra. "I think we need to go find them." Sandra hesitated for just a second. "You want to go after them right now?" Keanu stood up slowly, his eyes locked onto the path where the bikers had disappeared. "Yeah. I don't think we have a choice. They need to understand what they've done." Sandra gave him a sharp look. "What if they don't care?" Keanu's face softened. "Maybe we can make them." "So what would you do in a situation like this? Would you confront someone who hurt an innocent animal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button so we can continue this wild ride. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock were no strangers to the limelight. With their towering careers and A-list status, they had been in the public eye for decades. But despite their fame, they managed to maintain an impressive sense of normalcy, something many of their peers could never seem to do. And for Keanu and Sandra, it all boiled down to the simple pleasures in life: long walks, morning runs, and, of course, their beloved dogs. Keanu, though known worldwide for his roles in films like The Matrix and John Wick, was remarkably down-to-earth. He had always been a man who valued humility over fame, kindness over accolades. He was the kind of person who would give up his seat for someone on the bus or spend hours signing autographs for fans without a hint of annoyance. He never felt the need to flaunt his success. His quiet generosity spoke for itself. But while Keanu was the epitome of calm and collected, Sandra had a different energy. She too had built an incredible career, known best for her role in Speed alongside Keanu, as well as Gravity and The Proposal. But Sandra was the spark to Keanu's stillness. Where Keanu was serene, Sandra was bold and fierce. She didn't shy away from confrontation and had a quick wit to match her sharp tongue. Despite her fiery personality, she was incredibly loyal and always stood up for what she believed in, especially when it came to the people and causes she loved. Their friendship was something the media often speculated about, but in truth it was simple. Keanu and Sandra had known each other for years, and they trusted each other implicitly. Their bond was forged not in the flash of paparazzi cameras, but in the quiet moments, the dinners they shared, the long drives with the windows down, the late night talks about life, love, and everything in between. And now their shared love for their dogs had only strengthened their connection. Sandra had adopted a little terrier, whom she named Lola, shortly after a stressful year of filming. The dog was her comfort, her little stress ball. Keanu's 2 dogs, a playful pug named Buddy and a mellow beagle named Charlie, had been with him for years. They were more than pets. They were his family. Each morning he'd take them for a run, a way to clear his head, ground himself and find peace before diving into the chaos of the day. But today, that sense of peace was shattered. As Keanu and Sandra jogged along the path, their dogs happily trotting along beside them, they never expected the peaceful morning to turn into a nightmare. The loud roar of the motorcycles shattered the tranquility of the park. Keanu had always been the type to roll with the punches, but as the bikers sped past, the sight of one of them kicking his dog was enough to break his calm demeanor. He could feel his blood boil, and it wasn't just the protective instinct of a dog owner, it was something deeper. He had seen injustice in his life, but rarely had it been so blatant, so unforgivable. Keanu's mind raced. The biker's act of cruelty wasn't just an attack on his dog, it was an attack on something he cared about deeply: compassion, kindness, and the well-being of innocent beings. Keanu had always used his fame to advocate for things he believed in, whether it was animal rights or kindness to others. He didn't have a perfect life, but he tried to live it with integrity, with a belief that he could make a difference. And today that belief was being tested. Sandra, meanwhile, was already fuming. She had always been protective, and her sharp sense of justice was as fierce as her friendship with Keanu. She wanted to go after the bikers immediately, to shout at them, to make them feel the consequences of their actions. But Keanu, ever the voice of reason, knew that wasn't the answer. He had learned over the years that confronting anger with anger only escalated things. He needed a clear head, and Sandra, for all her fire, knew he was right. But that didn't mean she wasn't ready to take matters into her own hands. If Keanu wasn't going to act immediately, she would. "Are you sure about this, Keanu?" Sandra asked, her voice a mix of concern and determination. "Because I'm not going to let this slide, not for 1 second. Those guys need to be taught a lesson." Keanu glanced over at her, his face soft but serious. "I know, Sandra, I know, but we need to think this through. If we're going to make this right, we have to stay calm." Sandra was silent for a moment, the fire in her eyes flickering just a little, but ultimately she nodded. She respected Keanu's wisdom. Still, the thought of the bikers getting away with it gnawed at her. "Okay," she said finally, "we'll do this your way. But the moment they do something else, I'm going after them." Keanu smiled, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Deal. What do you think? Would you take a calm approach like Keanu, or would you be ready to jump into action like Sandra? Let us know what you'd do in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can join us for the next part of this intense journey." The tension in the air was palpable as Keanu and Sandra continued their jog, their 2 little dogs by their sides. Keanu kept glancing over his shoulder, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. The biker who kicked Buddy seemed so casual about it, like it was just another day for him, harassing the defenseless for fun. But for Keanu, it was far from just another day. As they made their way down the park path, the sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance. Sandra had pulled out her phone again, her fingers rapidly typing out a message. Keanu could tell she was tempted to call the authorities right then and there, but she was holding back, just as he was. "That guy, he had no reason to do that," Sandra muttered under her breath. Her eyes narrowed in frustration. Keanu nodded, his expression stern. "I know, but we need to keep calm. Let's take it one step at a time." Still, the unease lingered. The peaceful morning had vanished, replaced by the need for action. Keanu had always believed in taking measured steps, but the injustice of the situation made it hard to maintain that calm, especially when Sandra was so clearly upset. "I swear, if I ever see that guy again—" Sandra's voice trailed off, her anger still simmering beneath the surface. Keanu turned to her, offering a small smile. "I know you want to handle it right now, but we don't know the whole story yet. Let's just see if they come back. If they do, we'll deal with it." Sandra didn't reply at first, but Keanu could feel the tension radiating off her. She was frustrated, and rightfully so. No one should harm a helpless animal, let alone in such a cruel and public way. Her protective instincts had kicked into overdrive, and it was hard to blame her. As they continued their jog, Keanu's mind wandered back to the bikers. There had been something unsettling about the whole interaction. The leader of the pack, the one who had kicked Buddy, hadn't seemed like just another reckless motorcyclist. No, there had been something about the way he carried himself. It was as if he was used to getting away with whatever he wanted, without facing any consequences. Keanu couldn't help but wonder, was this the first time he had done something like this? Or was this a pattern? Just as they neared the park's exit, Keanu's instincts flared. He saw them, the bikers. They had circled back, their motorcycles rumbling as they tore down the same path, headed straight for him and Sandra. There was no mistaking it. The same man, the same cruel grin, and the same group. They hadn't just gone on their way. They'd come back to finish what they'd started. Keanu took a deep breath and slowed his pace, signaling Sandra to do the same. She looked at him, her eyes filled with determination, but Keanu shook his head. "Not yet," he said quietly. They stopped, standing at the edge of the path as the bikers approached. The leader of the group was the first to see them, his eyes locking with Keanu's. This time there was no laughter, just a knowing look that sent a chill through the air. One of the bikers muttered something under his breath as they passed, but the leader didn't seem concerned. He gave a quick nod to Keanu, almost as if acknowledging him. But it wasn't an apology, not even close. It was more like a challenge. Sandra clenched her fists, and Keanu could feel the tension in her body. It was as though she was ready to explode at any moment. Keanu, however, remained calm, watching the bikers carefully. The dogs, sensing the tension, were quiet now, their ears perked as they looked around at the bikers. "Stay calm," Keanu said, his voice steady but low. "Let them pass. We'll approach them after they're gone. No need to escalate it yet." Sandra's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Her breathing was shallow, her anger barely contained, but she trusted Keanu. She knew he was right. Escalating. Things now would only give the bikers more ammunition to make things worse. As the bikers sped past, Keanu's mind raced. He knew the best thing was to stay composed, but he also knew that something had to be done. They couldn't let this pass without taking action. This wasn't just about protecting their dogs anymore. It was about standing up to cruelty and making sure that people like these bikers understood that their actions had consequences. "Do you think we should report them?" Sandra asked, her voice tight with frustration. Keanu hesitated. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the right choice. "Yes, but we also need to be careful how we handle this. If they're part of a bigger group, we don't know what they're capable of. Let's find out what we can first." Sandra looked at him, her brow furrowed. "You think they're dangerous?" Keanu didn't want to alarm her unnecessarily, but his instincts told him that this wasn't a random act of cruelty. There was something about the leader of the group that made him uneasy. "Maybe, but we don't have enough information yet. Let's stay vigilant and gather what we can." Sandra sighed, clearly still on edge. "Fine, but I'm not letting this go, not now." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I know. We'll make sure it's handled." What would you do in this situation? Would you report them immediately or gather more information first? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to find out what happens next. The story is just getting started. Keanu and Sandra stood in the park, watching as the bikers faded into the distance. The situation had escalated quickly, and now they both found themselves on edge, unsure of how to proceed. The initial shock of the incident was wearing off, but the anger and frustration still simmered beneath the surface. They couldn't just let this go, they knew that much. But what now? Keanu had always believed in the power of calm, of thinking things through before acting. But the look on Sandra's face told him that calm wasn't going to be enough this time. The bikers were back, and they were looking for trouble. After a few moments of tense silence, Sandra spoke up. "I'm not letting them get away with this. I want to confront them, find out who they are and why they're doing this." Her voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes that Keanu recognized all too well. He sighed. He knew Sandra wasn't one to back down, and he wasn't about to stop her. "Okay, but let's be smart about this. We don't know who these guys are or what they might do. We need a plan." Sandra nodded, the fire in her eyes burning brighter. "Let's follow them, see where they go. Maybe we can find out more about who they are." Keanu's mind raced. This wasn't the ideal situation, but he knew that Sandra was determined. He didn't want to risk confrontation without knowing what they were up against, but he couldn't deny the urgency in her voice. The bikers had crossed a line, and Keanu wasn't about to let them get away with it. "All right," Keanu said, turning to walk toward the exit of the park. "But we need to stay in the background. We'll keep our distance. No direct confrontation." Sandra's eyes flashed with defiance, but she didn't argue. "Fine, we'll play it your way." As they made their way out of the park, Keanu's heart raced. He wasn't sure what they would find, but something told him this wasn't going to end peacefully. The bikers had already shown their disregard for others, and Keanu wasn't sure how far they'd go. The morning was starting to heat up as they stepped onto the quiet street outside the park. The sound of the motorcycles was still fresh in their minds, and as they walked, they kept their eyes peeled, searching for any sign of the bikers. It didn't take long before they saw them, a group of 4 motorcycles parked at a nearby diner. The bikers were sitting around a table outside, laughing and joking with each other, completely unaware that they were being watched. Sandra's grip tightened on her phone, ready to take action, but Keanu stopped her. "We wait," he said. "Let's see what they do. If we rush in now, we risk getting more than we bargained for." Sandra reluctantly agreed, and they found a spot across the street to observe. The bikers seemed relaxed, enjoying their breakfast, unaware that the people they had wronged were so close. Keanu couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. How could they be so nonchalant after what they had done? As time passed, Keanu's mind wandered back to the incident. The way the leader of the bikers had looked at him, like he knew something Keanu didn't, hadn't sat well with him. There was a sense of danger in that gaze, an unspoken challenge that made Keanu uneasy, but he wasn't going to rush into anything. They needed to find out more. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the bikers stood up and began to mount their motorcycles. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a glance. It was now or never. "We follow them," Keanu whispered, already starting to move. Sandra nodded, and they began to trail the group from a safe distance. The bikers didn't seem to notice, weaving through the city streets, heading toward a part of town Keanu wasn't familiar with. The area was quiet, industrial, barely any people around. The farther they went, the more uneasy Keanu felt. Finally, they arrived at an old, run-down building at the edge of town. The bikers pulled into the parking lot, and Keanu and Sandra slowed their pace, careful to stay out of sight. The building was an abandoned warehouse, its windows boarded up and the surrounding area deserted. It looked like a place where people went to disappear. Keanu's gut tightened. This wasn't just a group of reckless bikers. This was something else. "Do you think they're part of a gang?" Sandra whispered, her eyes scanning the building. "I don't know," Keanu replied, his voice low. "But we need to be careful. Let's head back before they see us." But as they turned to leave, a voice called out from behind them. Well, if it isn't the dog lovers." Keanu froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The leader of the bikers was standing behind them, a smirk on his face, flanked by two other men. The other bikers from the group had already disappeared into the building, leaving Keanu and Sandra alone with these three. Sandra immediately stepped in front of Keanu, her fists clenched. "What the hell do you want?" The leader took a step forward, still smirking. "I think you know what we want. You've been following us for a while now. Got something to say, pretty boy?" Keanu could feel the tension in the air, thick with hostility. He glanced at Sandra, who was practically vibrating with anger. This was it. The confrontation they had been avoiding was finally here. "I think you owe us an apology," Keanu said, his voice steady, though his blood was boiling. The leader laughed. "An apology? You're funny, but I don't think you're in any position to be making demands." Keanu's jaw tightened. "This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. The stakes are higher than ever now. What do you think Keanu and Sandra should do next? Should they continue to confront the bikers, or is it time to retreat and call for help? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what happens next in this heated showdown. The standoff felt like it had lasted an eternity, though it had only been a few moments. The leader of the bikers, standing just a few feet away, exuded confidence, perhaps too much. His smirk was one of arrogance, and Keanu could feel the challenge in the air. Sandra, visibly tense, was ready to spring into action, but Keanu held her back, the need for restraint echoing in his every movement. "I don't want any trouble," Keanu said, keeping his tone calm but firm. "But if you don't apologize for what you did to my dog, this isn't going to end well." The leader of the bikers took a slow step forward, almost daring Keanu to back down. The smirk was still there, but it wavered just slightly as his eyes flicked between Keanu and Sandra. He wasn't used to being challenged, and that perhaps was the real problem. This wasn't just about dogs, it was about power. The bikers weren't accustomed to being confronted, and now that someone was, they were starting to feel uneasy. "I think we're done here," the leader said with a feigned laugh, as though dismissing them entirely. "Go home before things get ugly." But Keanu stood his ground, his voice hardening. "Not until you do the right thing." For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The air grew heavy, thick with tension. Sandra stepped forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You're not getting away with this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with conviction. That was when it happened. The leader of the bikers, as if pushing the last button, suddenly reached down and kicked Buddy again, this time more deliberately. The tiny pug let out a startled yelp and scrambled to get away from the aggressive motion. Keanu's heart seized. The sight of his dog in pain, so vulnerable and innocent, shattered the last bit of his restraint. Without thinking, Keanu lunged forward, but Sandra was faster. She grabbed the leader by the arm, pulling him away from Buddy and shoving him backward. "You... Sandra?" Sandra's voice was like a whip cracking through the air. Her hand balled into a fist, and before Keanu could stop her, she swung it straight at the leader's jaw. The punch landed with a satisfying thud, knocking the leader backward onto the pavement. His friends, caught off guard, rushed to his aid, but Sandra didn't give them a chance to react. She moved with the speed of a pro, keeping them back as Keanu knelt down beside Buddy, his heart pounding with adrenaline. "Buddy, hey, it's okay," Keanu whispered, trying to comfort his dog. But his hands shook. The feeling of helplessness had consumed him once more. Buddy whimpered, trying to crawl into Keanu's arms, and Keanu felt the sting of frustration cut through him. "Are you all right?" Sandra asked, her voice full of concern as she stood over him, keeping a watchful eye on the bikers. Keanu looked at her for a moment, taking a deep breath to calm his racing heart. "Yeah, he'll be okay." The leader, now staggering to his feet, wiped the blood from his lip, his expression no longer amused. He glared at Keanu and Sandra, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret that," he spat, his voice thick with fury. "You don't know who you're messing with." Keanu stood up, his posture calm but firm. "I don't care who you are, you hurt my dog, and that's where I draw the line." The leader's expression faltered for just a moment, but then, like a switch had been flipped, he motioned to the two bikers with him. "Let's go," he growled, though it was clear the situation had left him rattled. The bikers climbed back onto their motorcycles, revving their engines as they prepared to leave. Keanu kept his eyes locked on them, his body tense, ready for any sudden movements. But as they sped away, a strange sense of relief washed over him. It was over, for now. But as the roar of the motorcycles faded into the distance, Keanu could feel the weight of the moment settling in. The physical confrontation was over, but the emotional toll would linger much longer. Sandra let out a long breath and shook her head. "I can't believe that just happened. Are you okay?" Keanu glanced down at Buddy, who was still trembling in his arms. "I'm fine, but Buddy, he's been through a lot." Sandra's expression softened, her anger dissipating, replaced by concern. She knelt down beside Keanu, running a gentle hand over Buddy's fur. "He's going to be okay," she said quietly. "You did the right thing. You stood up for him." Keanu nodded, though. The sting of the situation hadn't quite worn off. "I don't know if it was the right thing, but it was the only thing. I couldn't just let them get away with it." Sandra smiled faintly, her eyes softening as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're a good man, Keanu. Don't forget that." Keanu met her gaze, the bond between them more tangible than ever. They had just faced something dangerous together, but it was clear. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. As they walked away from the abandoned warehouse, the park now far behind them, Keanu glanced down at Buddy, who was now calming down. The small dog's eyes locked onto his, trusting and full of gratitude. In that moment, Keanu knew he had done the right thing. That was intense. How would you feel if you were in Keanu and Sandra's shoes? Would you have acted differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This story is far from over. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the city as Keanu, Sandra, and Buddy made their way back home. The day's chaos had left a mark on all of them, but with each step away from the park and the bikers, the tension that had gripped Keanu's chest began to loosen. He still couldn't shake the unsettling feeling from the confrontation, but the worst seemed to be over, for now. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sound the soft padding of Buddy's tiny paws on the pavement. The small dog, now fully recovered from the scare, trotted happily between them, occasionally looking up at Keanu as if to make sure everything was okay. Sandra, walking just behind them, let out a deep sigh. "You know, I don't think I've ever been that angry in my life. I've never just gone off like that before." Her voice carried a mix of exhaustion and reflection, the weight of her actions sinking in. Keanu turned to look at her. "I'm glad you did," he said quietly. "You kept them from getting any worse. You showed them they couldn't just walk all over us." Sandra gave a small, tired smile. "I suppose so." She paused, glancing down at Buddy, who had now stopped to sniff a nearby bush. "I don't know if I would have reacted so strongly if it wasn't for Buddy. You know, we protect the ones we love." Keanu nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Yeah, he's part of the family. You do whatever it takes to protect your family." There was a long pause as they continued walking, the weight of the day's events still lingering. Keanu felt a sudden wave of gratitude for Sandra. She had been right there with him when everything went down, and he couldn't imagine facing it alone. Her support, her willingness to stand by him and fight, was something that meant more than words could express. Sandra spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You know, I've never seen you so protective before. You're usually so calm, so zen. I've always admired that about you, but today I don't think I've ever seen that fire in you." Keanu chuckled lightly, though there was a trace of something else in his voice, a hint of regret. "I don't like losing control. I'm usually all about keeping things calm. But sometimes you reach a point where you can't just stand back anymore. You have to do something." Sandra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get that. I think I reached that point today too." They reached Keanu's apartment building, and as they entered the lobby, Keanu felt the weight of the outside world begin to dissipate. He was home, safe, for now at least. Buddy trotted ahead, eager to get back to his bed, and Keanu couldn't help but smile. "Thanks for being here today, Sandra," he said quietly as they waited for the elevator. "You really came through." Sandra smiled warmly, though there was a glint of something deeper in her eyes. "Of course, you're my friend, Keanu. We look out for each other." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. Keanu couldn't help but think about the way things had gone down, about the bikers and the tension, but most of all, about what it all meant. He had stood up for Buddy, for something he loved, but it had come at a price. And now, more than ever, he knew there were bigger things at play than just a few troublemakers on motorcycles. Once they reached Keanu's floor, they stepped out into the hallway. Keanu's apartment was just a few steps away, and as they approached the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of those bikers. But for now, it was time to relax, to breathe, and to process everything that had happened. Sandra reached for the door handle, but then paused, turning to Keanu. "You know, this whole thing, it's made me realize something." "What's that?" Keanu asked, intrigued. Sandra looked at him, her eyes searching. "That no matter how tough things get, no matter how crazy the world gets, we've got each other. We're in this together." Keanu smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Yeah, we are." With that, Sandra opened the door and they both entered, Buddy immediately darting toward his bed, clearly exhausted from the day's events. As the door closed behind them, Keanu leaned back against it, letting out a slow breath. The tension, the fear and the anger had all faded away. In their place was a deep sense of reflection. What had started as an ordinary day had turned into something far more significant. He had stood up for what he loved, and in the process he had learned something important about himself, about his ability to protect, to fight for what mattered, and to not back down when the time came. But there was something else too, a deeper realization that in moments of crisis, it wasn't just about protecting those you love. It was about the people who had your back, the ones who stood with you, no matter the cost. And as Keanu sat down on the couch, a quiet thought crossed his mind. The bikers might be out there, but they weren't the real threat. The real challenge was holding on to the things that mattered, the things that gave his life meaning. The weeks that followed the confrontation with the bikers seemed to pass in a blur. Keanu and Sandra had tried to return to their normal routines, but everything felt a little different now. The city felt quieter, almost like it had been holding its breath since that fateful day. And Keanu? He was changed. More aware, more cautious, but also more grounded in what truly mattered. Keanu took Buddy to the park almost every day, enjoying the peaceful walks and the little moments with his dog. Sandra joined them often, and together they continued to grow closer. Their bond had shifted from that of friends to something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. They were family, simple as that. But still, the thought of the bikers lingered in the back of Keanu's mind. The leader's words, his promise of regret, seemed to echo louder each day. Keanu knew it wasn't over. They wouldn't just forget what had happened, not after all the bloodshed and confrontation. Something told him that trouble was still on the horizon. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Keanu and Sandra sat on a bench in the park, Buddy lounging at their feet, content in his own little world. The quiet was soothing, and for a moment, everything felt right. But that nagging feeling still hung in the air. "Do you ever wonder," Sandra began, breaking the silence, "if we did the right thing? I mean, confronting those guys, what if we made it worse?" Keanu turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I've thought about it a lot, but sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Stand up for what's right, even if there's a risk." Sandra smiled, her gaze soft. "You're right. I guess that's why I'm glad you're in my life. You make me see things differently. I used to shy away from conflict, but now I'm not afraid to face it head on." Keanu chuckled softly. "That's because you've got a fire in you, and I've got your back always." She reached over, resting her hand on his. The gesture was simple, but in that moment, it meant everything. Keanu glanced down at Buddy, his loyal companion, and felt a swell of gratitude. "We've got a good team, huh?" Sandra laughed, glancing at Buddy, who was now sniffing around a nearby bush. "I'd say we're the dream team." Keanu's smile faded slightly as he looked up at the sky, his thoughts wandering. I just hope we're ready for whatever comes next. You know, sometimes you can't outrun the past. Sandra nodded, her expression turning serious. I get it. But no matter what happens, we face it together, and we'll get through it. Keanu met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words settle into his heart. Together. The evening stretched on in comfortable silence, but Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something was just around the corner. He didn't know what it was, but he felt it in his gut. As they got up to leave, the park now bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, Sandra stopped by the gate. Keanu. He turned to face her, raising an eyebrow. I meant what I said. Earlier, she continued, her voice quieter now. I'm glad you're in my life. No matter what comes, you've got someone on your side. Keanu smiled, a deep sense of warmth filling him. And you've got me. Always. They walked home, Buddy trotting along happily at their feet. The bond between them had deepened, and Keanu knew with a certainty he hadn't had before that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The road wasn't always going to be easy, but as long as they stuck together, nothing could break them. The next few days were tense. Keanu's sense of dread hadn't left him, and he could feel the weight of it, sitting like a dark cloud over his life. He knew the bikers would be back. It wasn't a matter of if, they would. That's how these things worked. They weren't the type to let a slight go unnoticed, and Keanu's refusal to back down had only fueled their rage. But Sandra was by his side, just as she had promised. Every day they carried on as usual, with Sandra showing up for their morning runs, and Keanu trying to focus on the small moments of peace, walking Buddy in the park, sitting in his apartment with a good movie, and chatting with Sandra about everything and nothing. He cherished those moments, knowing deep down that they couldn't last forever. It was a Friday evening when everything changed. Keanu and Sandra were just finishing a late dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant, the warm, golden lighting of the small eatery casting soft shadows across their faces. Buddy was at home, resting after another long walk, and they had finally managed to sit down and unwind after a busy week. Sandra pushed her empty plate away and smiled at Keanu. This was nice. I'm really glad we're doing this more often. It feels good to just relax. Keanu smiled back, though his mind was elsewhere. Yeah, me too, but you know, I'm still thinking about what happened with those bikers. They're still out there. Sandra's smile faded slightly. You think they'll come after us again? I don't know. But I have this feeling. They're not the type to let things slide, and I don't think they're finished with us. Just as Keanu finished speaking, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He didn't know why, but something in the air felt wrong, off. It was as if the world around him had shifted, and he was suddenly hyper-aware of every little detail. Then, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and his heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Sandra's phone, but it wasn't from Sandra. The message read, "You're not safe, we're coming for you. Be ready." Keanu's hand clenched around the phone, his stomach churning. The message was clear. The bikers were ready for the final confrontation. I have to go, he said urgently, his voice low. Sandra's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Keanu, what's going on? The bikers, he said, standing up quickly. They just sent me a message. They're coming for us. Without another word, they rushed out of the restaurant, Keanu's mind racing. He had to protect Sandra and Buddy, too. But what if it wasn't just about them? What if the bikers were coming for everyone he cared about? When they reached Keanu's apartment building, Keanu noticed something strange. The front door was slightly ajar, and the silence in the hallway felt oppressive. As he entered the lobby, Buddy's little yip echoed from behind the door to his apartment. The dog was inside, thankfully, but Keanu didn't know for how long that would last. Stay close, he whispered to Sandra, his voice tight. We have to make sure Buddy's safe. They hurried up the stairs, but as they approached Keanu's door, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Keanu's heart sank when he saw who it was, the leader of the bikers. The man's cold eyes locked onto Keanu, his lips curling into a wicked smile. I told you, didn't I? You should have walked away when you had the chance. Sandra stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Keanu, her eyes fierce. If you want a fight, you've got one. but you're not going to touch him or Buddy." The leader laughed darkly, motioning behind him. A dozen bikers stood in the hallway, their motorcycles rumbling ominously outside the building. Keanu's eyes flicked to Sandra, his expression serious. "Get Buddy, stay inside." Sandra didn't hesitate. She darted past Keanu, rushing into the apartment to grab Buddy, but the leader wasn't finished. He stepped forward, blocking her way, his hand gripping a metal pipe from behind his back. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. Keanu immediately stepped between them, his body tense. "Leave her alone," the leader sneered. "You really think you can stand up to me? We're done with you." The bikers began to move in closer, surrounding Keanu and Sandra. Keanu's heart was pounding in his chest. He had to think fast. He had to protect Sandra and Buddy no matter the cost. Just as one of the bikers reached for Sandra, Keanu sprang into action. He shoved the biker away, his body moving on pure instinct. He knew he couldn't win this fight alone, but there was no turning back now. The leader lunged at him, and Keanu dodged, feeling the rush of adrenaline surge through him. The fight had begun. It wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight to protect everything he cared about. In the chaos of the moment, Sandra's voice rang out. "Keanu, we need to get Buddy." Keanu threw a punch that landed squarely on the leader's jaw, and the leader stumbled back, momentarily dazed. "Go!" Keanu shouted. Sandra didn't need to be told twice. She bolted into the apartment, grabbing Buddy just as the little dog yelped in panic. Keanu's focus was laser-sharp now. He couldn't let them get to her. As Sandra slammed the door behind her, Keanu turned to face the bikers, the leader now on his feet, looking angrier than ever. "You'll regret this," the leader spat, his eyes blazing with fury. "I've already made my choice," Keanu said quietly, "and I'm not backing down." With that, the final confrontation began. The tension is at its peak. Do you think Keanu and Sandra can handle the bikers, or is this the end of the line? What would you do if you were in Keanu's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe. This story is far from over.